I'm Steve Conley. I'm a cartoonist and creator of the webcomic series The Middle Age, which is available on Webtoons and GoComics and Tapas, and on my own website at middleagecomic.com. The video you're about to see is an export from the Procreate app, which is the primary drawing tool I use for drawing, coloring, penciling, everything pretty much, except lettering. The video flies by pretty quickly, and I've added a commentary sort of explaining as best I can what I'm doing at each step along the way. It moves pretty quick, so it's hard for me to keep up. So if at any point there's a question that you have about, hey, what effect did you add there? What was going on in this section? Ask in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. I really hope you enjoy it, and if you do, please consider liking and subscribing so I know to make more of these. So without further ado, here we go. So what you see here is I start with basic color flats. Each one of the large shapes, every one of the major shapes is on its own layer. And then what I do is I select the base color, such as the green of the orc's face, and then on a layer that is set to multiply, I paint in the first round of shadows. And then using that color, that same exact green color, I create a new layer above that, and I set that layer to screen, and I go through and paint over all the highlights. These are the initial highlights you can see they're forming on the orc's skull and chin, and then another layer above that, again set to multiply with the exact same color. I go in and paint another round of shadows to create even more depth. The next stage you see very quickly there is that I paint in a red color on his nose, on his cheekbones, on his ears, and I set that to multiply, but I soften the layer. I adjust the transparency a bit on that to bring it down, and I put that below the highlights. I'm painting in additional highlights you see there. That bit of red in the ears and cheekbones and lips really adds a lot of life to the character. I like adding that. So even if the character's got green skin, you kind of see the blood underneath the skin. And you'll see later on I add that to the torso of the orc as well. And I kind of add that very liberally throughout. I don't want a character to have flat colors like in individual cells. I want to make sure that there's reflected color bouncing from one object to another, as if it was in the real world, as if those objects were next to each other. I also colored in the spittle and the fangs, you saw that, and now on his body, just like his face, I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm taking that sampled green color, and on a layer that's set to multiply, I'm painting in the first pass of shadows. Usually I do 2 passes of shadows and 2 passes of highlights to create the volume, and that creates the basic green volume. Then I'll do a pass with red, again set to multiply, and then I'll soften that layer a little bit, and that will give the hint of blood and life. And then the very last thing I do is that really sharp rim lighting of white light that kind of pulls on the sides of every one of the figures. I never really know ahead of time necessarily where I'm going to be adding that. Almost always it's each one of these shapes has kind of got like a 3/4 lighting, and then this white rim lighting I put on almost everything. You can see here the hand that's on Phosphonate's shoulder. I had forgotten to color that in, so I'm kind of going back and doing all the stages quickly there. And so the last thing I'll do on his body is I'll add that rim lighting, and it gives it a lot of punch. I do that effect a little too much. It's probably a little cheesy that I do it so much, but I just love the look, and it makes everything feel really round. And look how it pops that arm forward. I really like that. Now you're going to see a step here in a minute where I select the entire orc shape, and I kind of will fill it with blue. But before then, I didn't like that tongue that I had drawn. It looked like it was rooted in the mouth in a weird way. So I drew a new one, and then I didn't like it. I'd finished coloring it and I still didn't like where it was. It was a little too far to the right. So I drew it again, colored it all in, and then tinted it blue. I tend to make sure my shadows are blue, and that kind of helps push things back. So you'll see me do the exact same thing on his torso a little bit later on. Then I color in the rivets, I color in those little bits of lacing on the shoulder pads, and then I go in and color the leather pieces. Again, sampling that basic leather color, drawing in, painting in large shadows and maybe nicks and cuts and all sorts of wear and tear on those pieces. And I also add a splatter texture to it to kind of give it a little more of a variety. And that's fantastic against the skin. The skin looks smooth, but the epaulets and the bracers and those belts all look worn and beaten. And now you can see those blue shadows coming in. And that, again, helps the face pop forward. Where are we now? Oh, now I work on the blade. So on the sword, you can see I've added a ton of splatter because I want that blade to look like it's seen some action. And the hilt is done separately just so it can be a little bit darker. And I don't want the highlights of the blade necessarily be on the hilt as well, because then it would feel a lot flatter. That's that little splash of, that briefly you saw for a moment there, that splash of blue. I ended up turning off all those colors so I could focus on her colors at the moment. But that blue is there because when you see it later on, it'll push him back and pop her forward. On her face, I'm applying the exact same technique I used on the orc's face. Sampling the main color, using it with 2 passes of shadow and 2 passes of highlights. Now this is weird because I forgot the arrow in our heroine's shoulder, and so I had to draw it in after the fact, just like his tongue. I made a mistake, and so I had to go in there and make room for it. I'm glad it fit into the composition. I added the arrow and drew that in, and then had to separate that and basically give it its own layer of colors. So yay for mistakes. But I'm glad I caught it now before I published it and didn't have to have a reader later on say, hey, hold on a second, where's the arrow? So I go back, finish her face, add those highlights, again, the really strong, bright side lighting. And then I work on her armor. And kind of a time-consuming bit here, but each one of those embossed bits, I add a little bit of shadow and a little bit of highlight. I don't know if readers notice that or appreciate that, but to me it adds a layer that, not a Procreate layer, not an actual layer in the document, but it adds one more bit of wonderful texture to a piece. The hands were on their own separate layer, apart from the main armor, because I wanted to color those individually. I knew that they overlapped the armor, and if they were all on the same layer, it would have been easy for bits to splash onto the other bits, and it was just easy to keep it separated. So I colored the gloves. Now you're going to notice that glove that's digging into the orc's face, it really has a lot of the same value as her headpiece, and so they feel like they're on the same plane. A little bit later on, you're going to see me add a splash of blue to her glove to push it back. So even though it's got that bright rim lighting now and all those nice highlights and stuff, I'll cover that with a bit of blue to push it back, because again, I want there to be real depth. Working on her hair, the hair is where I tend to put a little more fine work. I'm not trying to draw every follicle, but I want to add enough touches of individual stripes and swipes with a pen to at least hint that it's hair, that it's got a separate texture. It's not like everything else. And again, of course, overdoing the rim lighting like I do. The next step, I think, is working on the collar, which she has. She's got this magical collar that's keeping her from transforming into her normal dragon form, which has got glyphs on it. Those glyphs are on a separate layer that are set to screen, and they glow purple. So that's kind of fun, a little different thing. Now I'm adding even more shadows. This is to create even more depth, have things pop out a bit more. I create a new layer, fill it with blue, and then reduce the opacity, and then along the edges of it, I kind of strip away, soften the edges with a watercolor brush. I add some red to her eyes because she's under the effects of a curse. And there you have it. Well, I hope you like this. Let me know in comments, and maybe I'll do more of these. No matter where you are in the world, I hope you're safe and well, and I'll see you online.